Hi there, Randy Green here, my take on Buddhism video 6. I just had a little bit of a download or a vision, you can call it or whatever, which is interesting because it was a piece of history as a kind of looking into the timeline and viewing like a movie, a piece of history, and whether or not it is accurate, that is always up for debate. But there's some interesting viewpoint in it because there's this question, as we talked about, the transference of the teachings that the Buddha gave and what the monks were carrying on within the specific lineages that kept up the oral tradition. But the question is, if these monks were not breeding children, were supposedly not breeding children, how were they passing off on this lineage? Were they selected or were they kind of appointed to be the carriers of these teachings? And did they have the original equipment to interpret the teachings correctly? From that level of information that came with that, I saw the hunting down of the original devotees or disciples, if we want to use that word, of the Buddha, because it's always when we read some of the texts, it's always said that the monks did this and that and whatever. But the ones that gathered around the Buddha, he was, this is interesting information as well, because how old was he when he actually became a father? He has been no more than 15 or 16, very young. So in that in itself, terrifying, suddenly becoming a father, but he was living in his father's palace. So that was secured, so to speak. It was not, he was completely on his own, but just to, if we said in that context, even though culturally speaking, that was the age of which you began to beget children, in the old times, then it kind of goes with the psychological structure as a little bit overwhelming. He had barely become a man himself, and then suddenly he was to become a father while he was technically still just a young man, a very, very young man, barely ready for that responsibility. So that's one of the levels that goes with. And then when we go the timeline of him walking out into the world, I saw this group of the Buddha teaching. He is in his 40s, early 40s. He died actually quite young. He did not get as old as has been said, if I interpret this information correctly. He died in his 40s, his late 40s, of malnutrition. Go figure. Because he was living, even though he was not, there are these different depictions of the Buddha as this fat Buddha or the skinny Buddha, and these are later interpretations that has been made. He did die of malnutrition. He died as well as of what we call a blood disease. I'm just saying the information I get here. And the ones he taught the original teachings, some of them were not particularly schooled in knowledge, so to speak. So that's why when we talk about some of what has been left and are part of the teaching system of the Buddha is what we could say analogies for the commoners, as we're seeing with the teaching systems of Joshua as well, or what is represented in the Gospels. And the ones that gather around the Buddha in his old age, were farmers, poor people, the cast-offs in the streets, the similar kind of background history we have with the Gospels. But this is because when we talk about in a world that is under the colonizers and where the original ones that used to carry the original genetic structure of our system, are they placed high in the hierarchy of a colonizing, invading race? Of course not. They are the ones that are have been re-engineered to become part of the low caste of any society, which of course goes with what we also know from other branches of spirituality or hidden teaching systems. Similarly as some of the esoteric teaching systems that goes with Egypt and the brotherhoods there, which has been kept in hiding, and there's no records of this. This is also, again, a little bit of old knowledge that I have access to. Okay, so So that is interesting. So that kind of counterfeit, I think that's what's called. It goes against the stories that have been made afterwards. And then we can, if that's the case, that these lay monks, which they were different people of low caste that were gathering around the Buddha, that were ill, and that was in his, when I say kind of blood disease, the question is, was this his hybridized DNA that began to break down? And in that process, what that part of the enlightenment process, that the physical form would break down and cease to exist, so that there would, whatever he was left of him would not be reincarnated and go into the reincarnational cycles. That would be what we call a physical effect of integrating a very high level of energy system and consciousness structure within a very short period of time. That is, a deterioration is one of the signs of too highly or too quickly integrated higher order types of energies, which is why most of us that are doing this work are doing it over an entire lifetime to slowly but surely upgrade our biological structure and the proteins and the enzymes and everything that we're composed of, to be able to carry with or integrate their higher order types of energies that are part of the components of the six-layered energy system. And again, the Buddha taught 5 layers, because when I keep repeating to the 6th layer, that's because the transformative energy system goes into the 6th dimension, where the Buddha was only set to bring from the 4th and into the 5th cycle, or the 4th root race into the 5th root race, just to put that in context as well. So when we talk about the ones that came after and claim to be the descendants or the carriers of the original oral teachings, my take on that one is that they were not the original ones that listened to the Buddha. Let me just put it that way. Because they were hunted down and taken out, and none of them survived. They tried to pass it on, but they did not succeed in the manner that they were supposed to. And we can also ask what that is all about, and what then happened with their energy systems, and where they have been put, and where they were put in storage, as it's called, because they since they gathered around the Buddha, they must have had some kind of genetic composition, some sort of lineage of the original elder races, which very deeply hidden, but the teachings were aimed at them. So therefore, it would be logical, if we see it in terms of invading forces that are trying to take over our entire system and eradicate all levels of history as we know of, that they would be tracked down and eradicated, and that none of the original teachings would be allowed to continue, similarly as we saw it with the last teacher that we know of, as were part of the Joshua missions, which had 2 teachers. There were Miriam and Joshua. And they came in with a team, by the way. So this is whereas when we look at the Buddha, he appears to be individually a loner that came in at that time, at that point in time, which is also how I see it in the vision that I have here been given and the information I've here been given. Another piece of the puzzle is his mother. She is a daughter of one of the priestly lineages, which is probably not part of the accounts, but that is perhaps cloaked in the story of her having vision of a white elephant. Not that the elephant impregnated her, but it was kind of the carrier of the information, perhaps showing her ancestry from the middle domains. Some of the middle domain tribes have different animals as their signature, so that when they do enter into this realm, taking on animal form or depicts themselves in dream time as animals, this is possible because they are working from the middle domain, and they will then take on that level of information as a kind of holographic overlay, from where those of us who have the remembering of the original lineages and the original houses of the lineages know which house that representative is from, which is interesting because when we talk about the messengers in the Hebrew text, they are all human-like, and the gods that came in Mesopotamia are also human-like. So this is again interesting when we are having these different groups and different groups of aliens, how they choose to represent themselves, telling in that manner and way which project and which lineage and which group of races they technically belong to. So that is also a little piece of hidden information. So that answers some of the questions when people could, which I have myself, as in kind of, is there any remnant evidence of the original teachings of the Buddha? And my answer to that question would be not as it was originally taught. And the question is, how high were he able to go on a spoken level? So it's not the oral teaching. It is not as much what he taught his disciples, to use that, or his students, the ones that gathered around him, but was what his alien DNA was capable of doing in the ones that listened to his teachings. It goes with the same kind of energy field that was around Joshua and around Miriam, that the radiation field and the vibrational field, and with that a specific type of coding that would initiate an amplification, that would initiate an awakening process of the original dormant DNA structures, of the original code system. So it was not as much what the Buddha said, it was in his appearance. It was in his field of energy that the true transmission took place. And if we go with what was the elder race and their purpose of putting in that operative inside this reality, as far as I have understood, and as I have understood all of the ones that send in teachers, is that they want their groups to be able to leave the enclosure. And for that to happen, you have to have activated the correct level of genetics to do so, as we talked about the 3 different layers of gate systems, which I talk about in the whole perception logs as well. You have the ones where you leave with crafts, and you have the ones where you can go via your light or your energy system, light body or energy system. And you have the one where you can go as pure genetics encapsulated in a very small sphere that the radiation field can comprise itself into, and from that be drawn out in the, it's like you shut the body down. You first shut down the physical level, then you take out the biofield, then you take out the artificial fields is the emotional field, the mental field. You simply shut these down. That is, the heart goes with the emotional field, the brain, and the neural network goes with the brain field. And as that shutdowns, the heart retracts. The first thing that happens is that the heart retracts the field around itself, the emotional field, shut that one down, carry the imprint into the heart field, which will then be drawn up to the head, that has 2 points, 2 access points there. And there it will initiate a process of shutting down the mind field, which will then be gathered together in a complex energy pattern from which life force will then be drawn into, closing down the timelines and the access to the timelines of the life that we have had. And once that happens, then the biofield begins to shut down the code systems, literally as sequences begins to shut down one by one, erasing these. And once that happens, then the physical form is technically dead. What is then left will be drawn out as the neural network shuts down, and that's the tunnel of light, and then be pulled out, and that is in the esoteric teachings and Hindu teachings called the Antakarana. That is the silver cord that it goes between the physical form and the higher order energy system, and then be pulled into the higher order energy system, which will then begin to collapse field by field, layer by layer, through these 6 layers, as that comprises into another type of complex energy patterns, which will then create what is called 3 permanent atoms, as the Bela material calls it, but 3 specific types of orbs that are joined together. What is left of the vibrational field, the radiation field, and the consciousness units will then be merged together in that last piece of the orb, and that will initiate a sequence that gives this comprised orb access to what we call a gate system, we call the hypergates, from where it can draw out, but it's technically created by the collapse of the energy system once it has been transformed and activated on its correct level. And that is the complete pull out. So that is what, when we talk about what is nirvana, and these lay people that were the lay students did not know what he was talking about. But did he activate that in these people so that they would be freed, as in kind of get not reincarnated, shutting down the reincarnation cycle for them? What else did the energy system of the Buddha actually do for his listeners, where he put there as an operative? Literally, it was not his teachings, but he taught stories. He created a specific atmosphere. He activated a specific level of energy in his listeners that then caught their attention. And by that attention, they merged fields. And by the merging of the fields, he were capable and able of activating these types of DNA, which could either be drawn into him so that when he left, he would take it with him out, or it would be activated within the listeners. And then at time of their death, that process would be kickstarted and they would be pulled out, leaving nothing behind of the original white elder races. And that is, if you ask me, that would be my interpretation of the mission of the Buddha and what he was technically doing here. So with that, when we try to find the answers in the teachings, we will probably not find any answers whatsoever. It is still informative. It is still, even though the later work were done by others, another faction, in terms of who created these teachings, that's another part of the library. And that goes with the other side under the colonizers. So that is kind of taking something that had a profound effect on the collective and actually initiated a series of sequences that could have activated older levels of our reality field to activate others that were descendants of these lineages, a possibility. So to shut that down, a new set of teachings were done, and then you had the whole institution around Buddhism that were created, which had, of course, remnants into the original oral teachings, because there were still different groups, as we see it with the Joshua missions, as well as some of the rabbis and some of the priestly lineages. They did listen to Joshua, and so did some of the Brahim races or lineages or priests. They listened to the teachings of the Buddha and they knew what they were up against. So that's also where I kind of find a similarity in the approach of what typically happens to teachers that come in and have this purpose, not as much to bring the teachings, because the teachings in themselves cannot be explained, but the transfer of energy, the hidden activation, the crypto awakening that happens when that operating vessel speaks, and when stories are told, and when narratives are created, creating patterns of information from where the mind field would be locked into a specific pattern of energy from which the heart field of the Buddha could activate the heart field of his listeners, and by that begin to clear out timelines. We don't know what the Buddha actually did when he was meditating for hours and hours and hours. We don't know what his inner work actually were, and that was his to keep and not his to share, because if he, as he grew older, became more and more his, what we could call his higher order personality took over, the more he got the understanding that this, what he was actually there to do, and by that were in peace with his destiny, so to speak. And I'm probably putting a little bit of projection into that one, but that is the air that is around the teachers that have come in. They have always known that entering into this reality field was a one-way ticket, just to probably impose a little bit of my own understanding onto the personality structure of the Buddha, whether or not that was actually part of his psychological nature. Either way, That would be my final account on that one. And even though that we could investigate further into, okay, which factions were then behind the new sets of teachings, interpreting the original teachings, building more information into them, then fit a complete different other agenda, which were more under the Brahim priesthoods that goes back to some of the lineages of Atlantis that were not oriented towards the highest good of the many, but more oriented towards service to self, let us just put it that way, and in that way created a teaching system that would allow certain groups within their ranks to do what we would call a semi-activation process that was similar, but they have always missed the last component, and that is the original genetic structure that were part of the Buddha, similarly as the story goes with what was remained of the body of Joshua. Again, the Kalontics come around the body of Joshua with creating different bodies, the one that was crucified and the one that moved out through the gate systems and left our reality field. I have in a way, I question that because to the best of my knowledge, this is not what happened, but we'll leave it at that because there is this hunting down of the ones that carries the original elder race, white strands, whether it's within the Pleiadian groups or within the Syrian groups, or it is within the Niburian groups or the Orion groups, because these are, as I mentioned earlier, these are the original genetic composition before the fall of Atlantis, and they are in quite high value because they are connected to gate systems. And that where you can travel between the worlds, so to speak. And they do hold the original configuration of the original lineages. So they do hold the potentials to be completely reversed back into the original non-regress state. And that is the hunt for all of the different groups that have been here under what we call the regress races and colonizers. That's why the colonized our system to begin with and did what they did to what used to be the original humanities of our system. Anyways, that was just a little bit of a further piece of information, whether or not it's true, whether or not it's an insertion, whether or not it's a false memory imprint, whether or not it is to lead me astray. That is all up for you to decide. For me, it rings true because I've seen it, I felt it, I've been part of that vision, part of that section of the timeline. It has left what we would call a type of memory imprint in my heart field, which is interesting. Whether or not that is a type of insertion of a specific type of technology, that is a very good question, which of course I will continue to work with in my clearing processes after this one, because it could be a memory that would put into my field, which I would then latch on, and then before I know it, be let down some kind of rabbit hole that actually is not true, but is led to the history of a false imposter that is a false imprint into our historical accounts, from where those who are trying to tap into the original history of the Buddha will then get that story presented to them and then stop their further investigations. And these are also some of the discernments we have to do when we tap into what we call the library, or if you want to the Akashic records, or whatever you want to call that level of reality, all depending on who you are. The Akashic records comes from the Hindus, and it is the Akasha is the etheric level, the light field that are part of the Akasha is technically the celestial realms in Hindu terminology. So again, this is where things get a little bit distorted and twisted and turned into the different teaching systems, because each and one of us have our own interpretation of it, as I have and are doing here. And if you're trying to say, well, I listened to that podcast and these podcasts of Randy and she's interpreting it this way, and you're trying to explain it as well without having all of the visuals and the many layers of information I have as well when I'm talking about this, but I'm not able and capable of giving all 6 layers to you, because it has to be verbal in a 2-dimensional language, so to speak, whether we could say technically perhaps it's 3-dimensional, because it actually has symbols and it has sounds and it has energy, but it is impossible to truly transfer the visuals I've got and the understandings I've got and the genetic signature of the Buddha I've got and all of these different layers of it, including the insights of what happened to the original devotees that were around the Buddha, including the fact that he died of not old age, but of a blood disease that was amplified because of his alien DNA that were breaking down, but that was part of the complete evaporation process, which he technically taught. So that would be the perfect exemplification and put into action what they were actively supposed to do, which is the best way of learning stuff: seeing by doing, learning by doing, and exemplification as role models has always been the best way to transfer higher order sciences, and not orally, not by written text, not by podcast, or not by any means where we are verbalizing things and by that containing it in a lesser thought form than it originally were part of, which is visually, auditory, code system, genetic composition, timeline sequences, nodal points in the true reality grid, the ramifications of these insertions or operatives. What are the larger effect on that one? What is the larger effect of the lineage it comes from? What is the true purpose and what's the true function? Who has initiated it? Via which type of technology? In what way? What type of engineering? Who was doing this? That's another question that should be asked. Who engineered the vessel of the Buddha? And onward and so forth, which would be the more accurate questions to ask than if these teachings are true or not. So in a way, we could say the teachings that were given are downsized information that has been engineered to capture the listener and make them go into a specific narrative and hold them in a specific type of energy. But the true carrier of the true wisdom were the energies and the code systems and the radiation energies that were emitted from the Buddha's body, his energy system, affecting all of the different layers of his listeners, and in that way assisted them to, at their time of death, be able to get out of the reincarnational cycles, which means that once the Buddha died and his followers died, that mission was completed and ended, and everything else that had been brought forth was what we call a revivification, a reviving of the sayings that he had put forth, similar as what we see with some of the sayings of the Joshua missions, as well as what Miriam taught, and were put into a context where we then have the story, the narrative, the whole, this is what happened, and these are his listeners, and they understood the information, they carried it on in an oral tradition, which you can't trace back, right? And they were sharing this and giving this, and then by that putting the focus on the word, of the spelling, of the voice, of the downsized narrative, and not on the energy system, not on the effect that an operative that comes with a specific type of configuration can have on his listeners and on the ones that are part of his field and part of what he is actively here to do. So it is the vessel and the energy system of the teacher that should be in focus and not the teachings. I think that is an important conclusion to derive from this little series of information, which is very suitable for video number 6. That kind of goes with correct partnerships, correct use of energy amongst self and others, and the rules of engagement, and all of these things that I am teaching in its correct context in the whole transition science classes that are part of the transformative energy system. So thank you for listening in and participating in my little sequence here of my take on Buddhism. And as far as I am concerned, as things are now, this will be my conclusion to that little investigation. Personally, I don't feel any need to go further down that path. For me, it feels concluded. For me, it feels I have derived what I need to know and what I probably why I took an incarnation as a Buddhist monk in the 1950s, why I had that part of my job here, or what I was doing here, to probably track down and see if there were any of the original descendants left. And if my vision is correct, then the answer will be a clear no, and that will complete an investigation that has also been part of some of the work that I am doing in this lifetime. So with that one said, thank you for listening in, and at some later point I will probably dig into some other things that I find interesting to investigate further and share here on the Whole Academy YouTube channel. But until next time, I hope some of you will find it interesting enough to go and do some of the Whole Academy courses where there are many different levels you can work on, and begin your own investigative journey into who and what you truly are, and what your original lineage is, and what your purpose was when you came here, and what your true function is, and how you will undo the effects of the timeline event, and what you need to do to get up to speed with your progression journey from either the third cycle into the fourth, or from the fourth into the fifth, or from the fifth into the sixth, and figure out where you are and what you're supposed to use this life and this outer reality setting for in the best ways possible, so that you are fulfilling your own completion cycle, and by that will be able to move on when you feel it's time for you to move on. And with that one said, thank you for listening.